On this Monday night, a Global News exclusive, proceeds from Calgary properties headed to Russia.
It provides an enormous amount of revenue, which is then used to bomb and murder Ukrainians.
Plus, how Canadian parts ended up in drones used by Russia to attack Ukraine. Allegations of foreign meddling in Canadian democracy. I asked the Prime Minister about the threat. Is China becoming the enemy of the West? The pain of rising food prices when relief could finally arrive. And he was all about kindness and curiosity.
Who are the people in your neighborhood?
Sunny day.
Remembering Sesame Street's beloved Bob McGrath and his connection to Canada.
Global National with Dawna Friesen.
Good evening and thanks for joining us. We begin with a Global News exclusive about a bankrupt Russian multi-millionaire and the properties he owns in Calgary. They've been seized by the Alberta government and a court has now ordered they be sold, but the proceeds are destined for a Russian bank that Canada has placed on the sanctions list. The point of those sanctions is to cripple the finances of Russian President Vladimir Putin and his inner circle so they can no longer fund the war in Ukraine. But as Just Semple reports, this case exposes how flimsy those sanctions can be.
These 10 residential properties in Calgary, including downtown condos and East Village suites, will soon go up for sale. And the proceeds are poised to fall into the hands of a Russian bank that's accused of financing the war in Ukraine.
And it's one of the biggest Russian companies. It's known worldwide as a funder of the Russian war machine.
The properties were purchased over the past decade by a Moscow businessman who has since fallen into debt. So the Alberta government seized the properties and ordered them sold, with the expected millions going to pay his creditor, a Luxembourg-based investment fund that's allegedly controlled by Russia's Gazprom Bank. The financial arm of Russian state energy giant Gazprom is accused of supporting the war in Ukraine, even processing soldiers' salaries and weapons purchases.
It provides an enormous amount of revenue to the Russian state, which is then used to bomb and murder Ukrainians.
We will continue to tighten the screws on anyone abetting this illegal invasion, including influential leaders of the state-owned energy company, Gazprom.
The Prime Minister singled out the Russian energy giant last fall while announcing a flurry of sanctions. Since the invasion, the Trudeau government has levied more sanctions than ever, targeting more than 1,500 people and entities. The RCMP says it has effectively frozen more than $120 million in assets. This national security law expert calls that a drop in the bucket.
We're really good at press releases announcing the designation of people, which looks good, and we have a long way to go in terms of the capacity to monitor and enforce them.
The Calgary case also highlights confusion within Canada's business and legal communities over when and how these sanctions should be applied.
And so, absent any sort of clarification from the Government of Canada, it really leaves banks and businesses and lawyers in limbo.
The Alberta judge in this case acknowledged that the proceeds will go to a company that appears to be controlled by a Russian bank, which faces sanctions. But she also said that sanctions can't be used as a way to avoid paying debt. The Trudeau government had previously pledged to use frozen Russian assets to help compensate Ukrainian war victims. But the funds in this case appear poised to flow instead to Russia. Dawna?
Okay, Jeff Semple, thank you. There is new information tonight about Canadian components being used in Iranian-made drones. Drones Russia is using to attack Ukraine. The so-called kamikaze drones are cheap to build and easy to operate and have emerged as one of the go-to weapons for both sides in the war in Ukraine. Now, a Ukrainian investigation has found Canadian-made parts in the drones used by Russia, despite a net of sanctions and trade restrictions. Mackenzie Gray has the details.
They're one of the deadliest weapons in the Russian arsenal. The Shahed 136, an unarmed kamikaze drone made by Iran, frequently deployed by Moscow at military and civilian targets in Ukraine.
They fly low, they're quite small, they were not as easily detectable and not as easy to shoot down using conventional weapons.
Fearsome, formidable, and featuring a Canadian connection. A Kyiv think tank took apart one such drone shot down by the Ukrainian military and found an antenna component made by Talisman Wireless, based in Ottawa. In a statement, the company said it's, quote, painfully aware their parts are in Iranian drones, adding they absolutely do not sell any of our products to Iran. So how do Canadian products end up being used against our allies? The Prime Minister says Talisman is cooperating with an investigation.
We have strict export permits in place for sensitive technology that are rigorously enforced, and that's why we're going to be following up with this company.
Canada has export sanctions on Iran, but unlike finished military products, most component parts like Talisman's antennas are just pieces of a larger whole and don't require federal approval to be exported, allowing Iran to get them elsewhere.
Remember, a lot of these small component parts could be easily sold to third countries elsewhere in the world, in Africa or something like that, for totally legitimate purposes.
30 other Western-made components were identified in the deconstruction from countries including Japan, Germany, and the United States. Those parts have helped the Shahad 136 take off internationally. At a cost of about $25,000 per drone, in a range of 2,500 kilometers, Russia can cheaply and effectively dispatch drones into key Ukrainian infrastructure.
The majority of these airstrikes, whether they're missiles or Iranian drones or other attacks or shelling, are hitting apartment buildings, hospitals, schools, as well as the energy infrastructure.
There have been hundreds of kamikaze drone strikes across Ukraine, but that's slowed dramatically in recent weeks. The Ukrainian military saying those drones don't hold up well during the cold Ukrainian winter. Dawna?
All right, Mackenzie Gray, thank you. Well, with the cost of so many things going up, especially groceries, Canadians are already being careful with their budgets. That's going to have to continue. Canada's annual food price report predicts next year is not going to be any easier. According to the report, all groceries, which have already gone up 10% because of inflation, are expected to get even more expensive. You can also expect the cost of dining out to increase by 4 to 6%. And as Ross Lord reports, while the impact is being felt by everyone, the most vulnerable are being hardest hit.
Janice Berry has always tried to give to others. Now she's conflicted about coming to this Nova Scotia food bank for help.
Well, there's two sides of it. There's the thank goodness I have the help when I need it, and then there's shame because I can't take care of myself anymore.
It's not her fault. Her career as a correctional officer was derailed by a painful and now chronic kidney condition. Then her husband died. Janice currently lives on long-term disability payments, less than half of her previous income.
I was getting by, but then when all the prices started going up, there's just, you wait till payday to go grocery shopping, so you have the money, and then payday comes and you pay your bills, and you realize you don't have the money. You just don't have it.
She's among a record high number of Canadians turning to food banks.
We have never had so many new people. In 1 week, we had 5 today, new people we signed up, and 4 yesterday. And most of those people have not been to a food bank before.
Food bank managers anticipate even more demand if Canada's food price report is accurate.
2023 won't be much of a break for families who are struggling, unfortunately.
The report estimates a family of 4 will spend more than $16,000 on food next year, $1,000 more than this year. It predicts overall, food will cost Canadians between 5% and 7% more. Researchers blame a wide range of factors, from climate change to fuel costs to the war in Ukraine, which made this year's 10% increase in food prices even higher than expected. Sylvain Charlebois says increases should ease later in the year when higher interest rates cause the economy to slow down. Until then, powerless consumers are left with few options, other than shopping around for discounts and using other forms of assistance if necessary.
Well, it means I can eat. It means I don't have to not pay my power or choose between mortgage and food.
Painful decisions in difficult times. Ross Lord, Global News, Lower Sackville, Nova Scotia.
Judgment Day for a top military officer. Coming up, a verdict in the sexual assault case against Major General Danny Fortin. We've heard a great deal about foreign interference in Canada's democratic process, hostile, covert efforts to influence politicians and election outcomes. It's happening in other countries too. This summer, the UK's security agency MI5 and the American FBI said the Chinese Communist Party is the biggest long-term threat to the West's economic and national security. And this fall, Global News broke a series of stories about allegations of Chinese interference here in Canada. I asked Prime Minister Trudeau about this on Friday during a year-end interview. I asked him why his government isn't being more transparent about the threat. Here's part of our exchange. Can I ask you if you've seen anything in our reporting that is wrong? Are we getting things wrong about the level of interference? Because we have information from CSIS investigations that the interference in Canada allegedly involved payments through intermediaries to a clandestine network that included candidates affiliated with the Chinese Communist Party, that China was placing agents inside the offices of MPs. Are you aware of that?
Now, first of all, it's really important that journalists keep pushing and asking questions and highlighting concerns. That's part of how our democracy works well, and it's really, really important. What I was, and people will understand that I have to be very deliberate when I talk about issues around national security and things that we know to not compromise operations or various things. But first of all, ensuring that despite all these allegations and reporting, people know that our election integrity held is pretty important and pretty basic, and I would put emphasis on that. I never got in all the briefings and all the serious briefings I never got briefings on candidates receiving money from China. And so that's something that we know. Getting further into details, we know there is ongoing interference in Canada, and we're going to continue to try and counter it. And ultimately our election integrity held, and we're going to continue to try and be open and transparent as much as we can on some fairly delicate national security issues.
Foreign interference is just one of the topics I asked the Prime Minister about. The full interview, including how the government plans to help Canadians tackle inflation and the rising cost of living, will air on December 25th, right here on Global. The former head of Canada's COVID-19 vaccine rollout says he is relieved today. Major General Dany Fortin says his long military career was derailed by an accusation of sexual assault that dated back more than 30 years. Fortin always maintained his innocence, and today a judge found him not guilty. Taria Isri was in the courtroom when the verdict came down. Taria.
Dawna, Major General Dany Fortin says today's ruling has vindicated him, but that his legal battle is not over, claiming he is the victim of political interference. Surrounded by his family and legal team, Fortin repeated his denial that he sexually assaulted a woman more than 30 years ago when they were students at the Royal Military College in Saint-Jean-sur-Richelieu.
This is a huge burden off our shoulders, my shoulders and that of my family. This is one important step in an ongoing process to prove my innocence and recover my reputation.
The woman testified she woke up in her dorm one night to find Fortin inappropriately touching her. But Judge Richard Meredith found significant contradictions in her testimony. There is no doubt the complainant was sexually assaulted, but the court cannot prove without a reasonable doubt the attacker was Fortin. Her lawyer says she's still deciding whether to appeal. The woman's identity is shielded by a publication ban. She said she waited until retirement to come forward because she was afraid speaking out would threaten her career. The case cost Fortin his job as head of Canada's vaccine rollout. He was let go last year and is now fighting the dismissal in federal court.
Senior military leaders and political decision makers presumed and acted as if I was guilty.
Fortin says he has no plans on retiring from the forces. Fortin is looking at all of his legal options after what he calls a failure of due process. The Department of Defense says it's now considering the judge's findings as it relates to DND's own responsibilities and accountability. Dawna?
All right, Taria Isri in Gatineau, Quebec, thank you. Canada's first full-scale electric vehicle manufacturing plant opened today in Ontario. The Prime Minister joined Premier Doug Ford to talk about how the partnership with GM can help Canada become a global leader in the electric vehicle industry.
We know we need to be delivering those raw materials from reliable, friendly, environmentally protecting countries like Canada. And there's a huge amount of interest in Asia and around the world at Canada being part of how we move forward as a world.
Don't kid yourself. I'm going to be on the phone over the next week with the head of Purelator, head of UPS, head of FedEx, I think FedEx is getting some, DHL thanking him for that, other businesses encouraging them to buy the EVs right here from the CAMI plant.
The General Motors CAMI production plant in Ingersoll, Ontario, temporarily closed in May to switch to producing electric vehicles. Today, the first 600 all-electric delivery vans rolled off the production line. Education workers in Ontario have voted to ratify a new 4-year deal with the provincial government. The president of the Canadian Union of Public Employees says about 73% of its members who voted were in favour. This ends the lengthy standoff between the two sides. Education workers walked off the job for 2 days last month after the provincial government passed and then later repealed legislation that allowed use of the notwithstanding clause to impose a contract and ban strike action. Ahead, the status of Iran's morality police as public pressure against the regime grows. In the U.S., a power outage affecting more than 35,000 people is being investigated by the FBI. 2 substations in North Carolina were severely damaged by vandals using firearms. Investigators say the attack was intentional and targeted, but they have not discovered a motive nor a suspect. Crews are working to restore power. They say it could take days. Until then, the area is under a state of emergency and a curfew is in place overnight. The pressure keeps building on the Iranian regime. Hundreds of people have been killed in the unrest that erupted in September after the death of Mahsa Amini. She died in police custody, arrested for breaking hijab rules. Well, now protesters have called for a 3-day strike as a new form of defiance. An Iranian state media denies reports the morality police have been disbanded. Farah Nasser reports, and a warning some viewers might find the content disturbing.
For 4 decades, they have brutally enforced Iran's strict dress code. Once a prominent presence, Iran's morality police haven't been seen as much since protests broke out months ago. This weekend, Iran's attorney general was asked why. His response? The force is being abolished.
His comments, I believe, were misinterpreted.
Behdad Mahichi, an Iranian Canadian, has started a social campaign translating Farsi articles into English to give the West some clarity into what's happening in the region.
There's no victory in this. The laws, the mandatory hijab laws exist, with or without the morality police.
According to experts, enforcement isn't changing, it's being renamed.
Now it is called the Public Safety Police. It's the same thing. It's essentially a rebranding of the name of this force.
Some point to the comments being lost in translation. Others say it's a response to the unrest.
And I think it may have even been intentional because it came 1 day ahead of a 3-day general strike.
Shuttered shops and markets were a prominent display across Iran today as a massive act of protest against the government. These same streets where Iranians have been demonstrating after the death of 22-year-old Mahsa Amini in September, 3 days after she was detained by the morality police. Now, another voice is joining the anti-regime chorus, the outspoken niece of Iran's supreme leader, Ayatollah Khomeini. Iranian officials say 200 people have died, though human rights groups believe that number is much higher and includes as many as 60 children who were attending protests, including 10-year-old Kian Pirfalak, who, according to his parents, was shot by security forces 2 weeks ago.
The claims by the Attorney General have not been confirmed by Iran's government, but a news agency in the country reports the Revolutionary Guard said on Monday it will show no mercy to rioters and thugs. Farah Nasser, Global News, Washington.
Sing a song.
For nearly half a century, he was a familiar face on a familiar street. Next, remembering Bob McGrath.
Sing.
For generations of children, he was a teacher, a friend, and a familiar face on television. Bob McGrath, who exuded kindness and curiosity, has died at the age of 90. He was one of the original Sesame Street cast and made it his life's work. As Heather Urix-West reports, his generosity of spirit extended to charities here in Canada.
All right, gentlemen, are you ready to start your first lesson?
Not so fast, Pop.
For decades, children came to know him as music teacher Bob Johnson, a resident of the world-famous Sesame Street. One of the show's original cast members, Bob McGrath appeared on Sesame Street for close to 50 years. His face and voice, a treasured part of childhood memories everywhere. But across Canada, McGrath was known for his charity work as well.
Bob wanted to do anything and everything he could to make children's lives better.
I've got 5 kids. They're all very, very healthy.
McGrath helped host BC's variety show of Hearts and Saskatchewan's telemiracle telethons since the 1970s, helping to raise hundreds of millions of dollars over the years to help kids access special needs supports or medical care.
We have children.
He had this gift to, through TV, to let people know that he cared, to in turn help them care.
You always took something from him of how to be a better person, how to have human kindness.
Okay, Fluffy. Here's an F. See if you can play that, all right? Listen carefully.
His family announced the actor's death on social media Sunday. Bob McGrath, beloved children's entertainer and generous supporter of Canadian children's charities, was 90 years old. Heather Urix-West, Global News, Calgary.
That's too low. Listen again.
And that is Global National for this Monday. I'm Dawna Friesen. Tonight's Your Canada is the Light Up the Night display at Pilley's Island Methodist Church in Newfoundland and Labrador. We'd love to see your festive Canada photo. Please email it to viewers@globalnational.com. Thanks for watching. Hope to see you here again tomorrow. Bye-bye.